When people talk about teaching in Shanghai, there's this idea floating around that teachers here make a lot of money. And yeah, that can be true for a great majority of foreign teachers. But that's not the full picture, in my opinion. Salaries here vary widely depending on the type of school, your background, and unfortunately, even how you look like and where you're from. Now, let's start from the top. Let's start from the international schools in Shanghai, right? And the reason why it's on top is because a lot of people would like to work in one of those international schools. um, these schools are not to be confused with bilingual schools because they're a bit different, and I'll get to that in a second, right? Because the thing is that international schools typically serve kids with foreign passports, and sometimes those kids happen to be Chinese kids who have a foreign passport but live their whole lives in China, right? I know that there's some international schools out there that get pretty desperate to enroll kids, and they accept about anyone who can afford it. These jobs usually require you to have a teaching license, by the way, a teaching license from a native English speaking country. And salaries, as far as I know, are pretty high. They go from 30 to 35 to 40 and even 50,000, depending on your qualifications, your seniority, and your position. They are generally well structured, in my opinion, and they come with really good benefits. They allow you to move in with your family. They pay for everything like education, trips back home, and insurance. Uh, I know that these kind of schools they struggle a little bit, especially after COVID, because there's a massive teacher shortage. And so it's don't be surprised if you stumble upon your classic Russian English teacher from Canada. Then second, there's the bilingual schools. These are for the local Chinese who just happen to have English classes, right? They often hire both native and non-native speakers to be teachers, either directly or through agents. And salaries vary a lot here as well, usually between 20,000 RMB to 30,000 RMB per month. And direct hires usually earn a little bit more than those hired through agencies because, the agents, they usually keep a cut of your salary every month, depending on what kind of deal they have with the school. It's also worth mentioning that visa issues can be tricky for non native speakers, even if you're qualified academically, because not having the right passport might block you from legally teaching English. It doesn't mean that you won't get a visa as a non native speaker. It's just that you'll almost always end up teaching with the right kind of visa, but the working permit will show a job position that is completely unrelated to your actual duties. And needless to say, sooner or later, this is going to get you in trouble with Voldemort. Let's talk about kindergartens, and man, this one is all over the place. I've met people earning just 10,000 RMB a month and others making up to 25,000 or more. But, there are also many daycare type setups mixed in here. Some of these places pay per hour, especially if you're just a part timer, and the hourly rates start at 200 RMB, going up to 400 RMB if you're in high demand. And by being on high demand, I'm referring to candidates with the following characteristics: female, below 30, blonde with Caucasian features, native English speakers, or non native English speakers with little to no foreign accent at all. Of course, the demands will vary and they might take anyone else, once again, depending on how desperate they are to get a foreign teacher, right? Now, let's talk about training centers. These are a hit or miss, in my opinion, because for some foreigners, is exactly what they're looking for, but for others, it's their last resort. First, let's start from the fact that ever since the double reduction policy took place, training centers teaching any kind of school subject are not allowed to operate anymore. But the policy has also so many ambiguities, and so many gray areas that training centers are still operating. But even so, they can't legally hire you as a teacher. They don't often offer full time contracts, but hourly rates, and their business is somewhat unstable. The teacher and students turnover is usually very high because they rely on unreliable teachers, man. That's the reality. uh and what do I mean by that? I'm talking about students, right, whose main goal in China is not teaching, but just having some spare McDonald's money every week, right? So it's not rare to see them go out of business. And also another thing about training centers is that they'll likely be working on the weekends, which turns off a lot of foreigners who live for the weekend. Now, also the pay can vary, but expect something like 250 to 350 or 400 per hour if you're lucky. Now, some successful training centers might pay you even more. So, this guys, man. So they just want to be on the video. So, all right. It can vary. Expect something like 250 to 350 RMB per hour if you're lucky. Some successful training centers might even pay you a fixed salary depending on how big and stable their center is. But chances are that your training center job will kind of suck in every aspect. Now, let's talk about private tutoring. Technically illegal for foreigners, but many do it anyway. Pay can be good, but it's inconsistent. And the commute really ruins it, in my opinion. And another thing that you got to take into consideration is that Chinese parents often want you in the evenings, and some aren't really looking for a tutor, but they're often looking for someone to babysit their kids while speaking to them in English. So they don't have to deal with them after work. So I want to talk about some uncomfortable truths, but before that, I want to thank the sponsor of this video, Simple Link VPN. Click the link on the description of this video to get a free trial. What makes Shanghai a very particular place to teach is that although there are many teaching jobs and teaching side gigs, not all teaching jobs are available to everyone. Plus, finding a good teaching job in a tier one city like Shanghai, man, that's also not going to be very easy, right? Especially if you don't want a job that is in a remote area of Shanghai, right? It's going to be slightly difficult, but not impossible. Now, unfortunately, your salary might not depend on your qualifications solely, but also on your looks, your gender, and also your passport. That's just the reality. And the good looking, native speaking white teacher might get offered more than someone equally qualified from another background. That's the sad reality. And I think it's about time someone brings it up. It's not fair, but it happens. And when it comes to this behavior, you can't put all the blame on the foreigners, nor the managers, nor the parents, because on the one hand, the parents often have this stereotypical view of what professionals should look like or come from. For example, if you're a sushi chef, you must come from Japan. If you're a salsa dance instructor, you must be Latino. If you're a basketball coach, you have to be black, of course. And if you're a ballet dancer, you must be Russian. Whatever it is, it has to make sense in the eyes of the parents who are the ones who pay the money. And man, um, on the other hand, the school managers and the school owners, they know this pretty well. So they'll be looking for foreigners who are easy to sell to the parents. And man, you can not blame the foreigners for taking these jobs and trying to make some money. Now, something that you got to be aware of is the office hours. In some schools, you're required to sit at your desk all day, sometimes doing the most trivial task, or even worse, sometimes you might find yourself doing absolutely nothing else other than breathing air and touching the fish at the teacher's office cubicle. And man, some teachers find this unbearable. I know that others don't find it all. It's like free money, I guess, but it really depends on what you're looking for. But I think that you can genuinely get tired of doing absolutely nothing every day for 8 hours, right? Especially if you teach very few classes every day, right? Now, I know some foreigners might accept jobs with lower salaries as long as they don't have to stay in the office the whole day, right? Because you might think, oh, I mean, come on, a teacher can have so many responsibilities. Yes, that's true. But man, based on my experience, I also know that the Chinese often delegate these very important functions to the Chinese who make less money than everyone else, right? Like every other foreign teacher, right? And as you may have noticed, I mentioned international schools and bilingual schools and kindergartens first, and training centers and tutoring gigs at last. And this is not a coincidence. I sorted the institutions by desirability. And of course, people might agree or disagree on what is and what is not a desirable or undesirable teaching job in Shanghai. After all, teachers make much more money than many other foreigners working office jobs or jobs in the hospitality industry. But in my opinion, most foreign teachers hope to work at international or bilingual schools, right? Because of all the benefits that I mentioned above, right? The pay and the vacations, and sometimes they even pay for your rent, so you can actually have a lot of disposable income that can allow you to travel and do all these kind of things that you couldn't possibly imagine back home, right? Now, the thing is that there are the other kind of people who take jobs such as, training center jobs and tutoring gigs. And, all people might argue that all these jobs can be well paid regardless of how undesirable or desirable they are. But the thing is that the lower you go on the list, the more likely you are to be perceived not as a teaching professional, but as an object or merchandise to be sold. And I think it's self explanatory why jobs in which you are seen as the merchandise are undesirable. Now, another thing to consider is that while loyal teachers might be appreciated on most educational institutions, some managers and headhunters, especially those who are overly reliant on small groups of teachers rather than appreciating the teachers, they will very deep inside resent them, especially because in the flip of an eye, an entire school can shit their pants if one of the teachers is late, takes a sick leave, or decides not to show up all along, exposing the vulnerable nature of their business. And man, based on my experience, feeling vulnerable is not an emotion Chinese managers handle very well. Unfortunately, this video is getting a bit too long and the topic is very extensive. So I'll upload a second part this upcoming week. Remember to like, comment, and subscribe. This was Lawaish. Until next time.